They left my 12-year-old daughter on the steps of a homeless shelter. Then they went to dinner. I need you to sit with that for a second before I tell you the rest, because I know how it sounds. I know it sounds like something out of a movie or one of those unhinged Reddit threads that makes you put your phone down and stare at the ceiling. But it happened. It happened in Nashville, Tennessee, on a Tuesday evening in late October, when the dogwood leaves were turning rust and gold and the air smelled like wood smoke and somebody's backyard fire. And my family, my blood family, the people I grew up eating Christmas ham with, decided that my daughter, Collie, was not worth a seat in their convoy. Let me set the scene for you, because context is everything when it comes to the Voss family. My mother, Renata Voss, turned 65 that October. She was the kind of woman who ironed her pillowcases and kept a spreadsheet for her social calendar and had never once in her adult life worn flat shoes to a dinner reservation. She had spent 40 years building the Voss family name in Nashville society. Charity galas, museum, board seats, the whole production, and she took that reputation as seriously as most people take their religion. Her birthday was not just a birthday. It was an event. It was curated. It was, as she told anyone who asked, the culmination of a beautiful chapter. She had rented out the private dining room at Bastion, the kind of restaurant where the chef's name appears in 3 national publications a year, and the prefix runs $240. A head before Wine. My sister Petra had been planning this dinner for 6 months. What she also been planning, I didn't know yet, was something far more dangerous. Petra Voss Calloway was 42, 3 years older than me. And she had always operated with the quiet authority of someone who believed the world owed her a detailed apology. She had married Tate Calloway, a real estate developer whose net worth was the kind of thing people whispered about at parties. And she'd leaned into that wealth the way some people lean into a warm wall. She lived in a 12,000 square foot home in Belmead, drove a car that cost more than most people's annual salary, and had recently begun referring to her housekeeper Dolores as my household manager. A title Dolores, to her credit, seemed thoroughly unbothered by. Petra had 2 children, Foster, 16, and Brinley, 14. She had never once called my daughter Callie by her correct name on the first try. It was always Carly or Callista or, once bizarrely, Colette. Callie is 12. She is brilliant and strange and obsessed with marine biology and rewatches the same 3 episodes of Blue Planet on loop when she's anxious. She has my dark hair and her father's stubborn jaw, and she has never once in her life asked for more than she deserved. Which is why what happened that night gutted me in a way that I am still, even now, excavating. The plan, as I understood it, was simple. We would all drive in separate cars to Bastion, valet, have dinner, celebrate Mom, my family, meaning me, my husband Rowan, and Callie were coming from our place in East Nashville, a neighborhood that Petra had once described, unprompted, as charmingly transitional. Rowan had to fly in from Chicago that afternoon for a conference, so the timing was tight. He texted me at 4 o'clock. Landed. Grabbing a car? Be there by 6. The dinner reservation was at 7. We had margin. What we didn't have was a warning. Nobody called. Nobody texted. They just left. Here is what I pieced together afterward, because in the moment I had no idea what was happening. Petra had decided sometime in the 48 hours before the dinner that she needed to restructure the seating for flow. Her words: she had booked a private car, a Sprinter van, actually black, the kind you see shuttling bachelorette parties between bars, to take the family from my mother's house in Green Hills to Bastion. The original plan had been for everyone to drive themselves. But Petra had decided, because Petra always decides, that it would be more special if they arrived together. She did not tell me this. She told my mother. She told my Aunt Greta. She told my cousin Sasha. She told everyone except me. Rowan and I were running 12 minutes late. Traffic on I-440 was a parking lot. And I'd made the mistake of getting off at the wrong exit, trying to be clever about it. I called Petra at 6:48. She did not answer. I called my mother. She picked up on the fourth ring, her voice already carrying the particular brightness she reserved for social occasions. That polished silver warmth that meant she was performing. "Hadley, we're just leaving," she said. "We'll see you there, sweetheart." "Mom, we're 5 minutes out. Can you just the car is right here." "We can't hold it." "The reservation is firm, Mom." Callie is with us, but she had already hung up. I told myself it was fine. They'd meet us at the restaurant. We'd valet, walk in. It would be fine. It was not fine. Because Callie was not with us. I need to back up because this is the part that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. Callie had ridden over to my mother's house earlier that afternoon with my Aunt Greta, who'd offered to take her so she could visit with Grandma Renata before the crowd arrived. This was normal. Callie loved Aunt Greta. Aunt Greta was the one adult in the Voss family who still knew all of Callie's teachers' names and asked real questions and remembered that Callie had once cried for an entire afternoon over a documentary about beached whales. So Callie had gone over there at 3, and Rowan and I were going to meet everyone at the restaurant. What I did not know, what no one apparently thought to mention to me, was that when the Sprinter van pulled up and everyone started loading in, there was a head count situation. There were 9 people: my mother, Petra, Tate, Foster, Brinley, Aunt Greta, Greta's husband Roland, their daughter Sasha, and Callie. The van seated 8 comfortably. Tate had brought a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle to crack open in the van because, of course, he had, and there was a whole production around that. And somehow, in the shuffle of who was sitting where, and who was holding the bourbon, and who was making sure Mom's wrap didn't get caught in the door, my 12-year-old daughter got left on the sidewalk. But here's the thing. Here's the thing that keeps me up at night. Callie didn't get accidentally left. Callie was told to wait. Petra looked my daughter in the eye and told her to wait on the sidewalk. They would send the car back. They never sent the car back. Callie told me this herself 2 hours later when I finally reached her by phone. She had waited on the sidewalk outside my mother's house in Green Hills for 22 minutes. Then it started to drizzle. She rang the doorbell. My mother's housekeeper had already left for the evening. She tried Aunt Greta's phone. No answer, because they were all in the van toasting with Pappy Van Winkle at that point. Volume up. Petra playing DJ. She tried my phone. I was navigating and the call dropped. She tried Rowan's. It went to voicemail. She was 12 years old, alone in a quiet Green Hills neighborhood as the sky went dark. Wearing a dress she'd picked out herself because she wanted to look nice for Grandma's birthday. She started walking. She found a bus shelter 4 blocks away and sat under it. A woman, a stranger, a genuinely good human being named Paulette, who told Callie she volunteered Saturdays at the Salvation Army shelter 2 streets over, found her there, and when Callie couldn't reach anyone, walked her to the shelter's community room and sat with her until I finally picked up my phone and called Callie back at 7:34 p.m. I was already at Bastion. I was already sitting at the table. I had walked into that private dining room 7 minutes late, heart pounding from the traffic stress, ready to apologize and sit down and drink whatever wine Tate had chosen. And I had looked around the table and not seen my daughter and asked where Callie was. And my mother had said, with the breezy confidence of someone who has never once been held accountable for anything, "Oh, Petra said she'd sort it out." I looked at Petra. Petra was studying her minusert what out. I said, "Where's my daughter?" "There wasn't room in the car," Petra said. I told her to wait. Tate was going to have the driver go back. Did the driver go back? Silence. Tate cleared his throat. That was when my phone lit up with Callie's number. I will never forget the sound of her voice. Small and careful, the way she got when she was trying not to cry in front of people. "Mommy, I'm at a shelter. I'm okay. But can you come get me?" I left the table. I didn't excuse myself. I didn't fold my napkin. I didn't say a single word. I walked out of that restaurant, handed the valet my ticket, and drove to my daughter. Rowan met me there 20 minutes later, and we sat with Paulette in that community room, and Callie ate a granola bar someone had given her and told us the whole story in the flat. Factual way that children use when they're trying to be brave and are almost pulling it. Off. Nobody from the dinner called to check on her. Not one person. Not my mother. Not Aunt Greta. Not Sasha, who was Callie's second cousin and supposedly her friend. They had their dinner. They had their speeches. My mother blew out her candles and Tate refilled his glass, and somewhere across Nashville, my daughter sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights and ate a granola bar. That night, after Callie was bathed and in bed, I sat at my kitchen table in East Nashville with a cup of coffee I didn't drink, and I thought very, very carefully about what I was going to do next. I did not cry. I had already cried in the car, ugly and silent, while Rowan drove and Callie slept in the back seat. I was done crying. Crying is for when you are powerless, and I was not powerless. I had spent 11 years building a career in corporate communications, specifically in crisis management. I knew how to find pressure points. I knew how systems buckled. I knew that the people who believed they were untouchable were always the most vulnerable, because they'd stopped watching their backs. I opened my laptop. I pulled up a blank document. I titled it The Correction. You have to understand the VOS family ecosystem to understand why what I did next was so precise. My mother's world ran on reputation. It was the currency she'd traded in her entire life. She sat on the board of the Nashville Children's Arts Foundation. She chaired the annual fund committee at Vanderbilt's Alumni Association. She was photographed twice a year in Nashville Lifestyles magazine. Always in her living room, always with the same arrangement of white peonies on the mantel. The Voss name meant something in this city, and she had spent decades making sure of that. Petra's world ran on access. She was a member of 3 private clubs, sat on 2 nonprofit boards that overlapped conspicuously with her husband Tate's development projects, and had recently announced via a catered garden party, naturally, that she was launching a lifestyle brand called Settle and Bloom. It was going to be, according to her Instagram, a curated perspective on elevated Southern living. She had 48,000 followers. She had a brand partnership deal pending with a Nashville-based home goods company. She had plans. Tate's world ran on money, and specifically on the deals that generated it. He had 3 major mixed-use development projects in the pipeline, all requiring either city council approval or community board sign-off. He had a reputation as a straight shooter, a family man. The kind of developer who showed up to community meetings and said things like, "We want to be good neighbors," while his lawyers quietly filed the paperwork that would displace those same neighbors. I had been watching all of this for years. I had cataloged it the way you catalog weather patterns, not because you plan to use the information, but because you are that kind of person. I am that kind of person. Rowan says I have the memory of someone who has never once felt truly safe, which is probably accurate and probably worth unpacking with a therapist someday. But right then, sitting at my kitchen table, that memory was a weapon. I knew things about Petra's brand deal that Petra didn't know I knew. I knew things about Tate's development projects that would make the city council very, very interested. And I knew something about my mother, something I had stumbled across 18 months ago and tucked away like a seed. That was about to bloom. I'll get to that last one. But first, let me tell you about the brand deal. 6 weeks before Mom's birthday dinner, I had been at a fundraiser for the Nashville Children's Hospital. I do pro bono communications work for them twice a year, which is how I ended up on the invitation list. Standing near the bar with a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, I had overheard a conversation between 2 women I recognized as executives at Hale & Sutter, the home goods company that was supposedly partnering with Settle and Bloom. They were not speaking quietly. They were speaking the way people speak when they believe themselves to be in a private corner of a loud room, which they were not. The deal with Petra, one woman told the other, was on thin ice. Not because of Petra's content, that was fine, serviceable, but because of what their due diligence team had surfaced about Tate's company, Callaway Development. Specifically, a building Tate had developed in Germantown 3 years ago had a lawsuit quietly attached to it. Wrongful displacement, predatory lease agreements, the kind of thing that, if it got into the press, would make Hale & Sutter very uncomfortable being associated with the Callaway name. They had not yet decided whether to walk away. They were weighing it. I had taken a slow sip of my wine and committed every word to memory. I also knew about the Germantown lawsuit because I had a colleague, a woman, named Delia, who did investigative PR work and sometimes referred cases to me, who had mentioned it in passing 8 months earlier. It was filed by a community housing nonprofit and was currently buried in procedural motions. It's a kind of legal slow burn that can go years without resolution. Tate's lawyers were very good at slow-burn. But Delia knew a reporter at the Tennessean. And I knew Delia the morning after my daughter ate a granola bar in a homeless shelter while my family ate a $240 dinner. I sent Delia a text message. It said, "I have something for you. No attribution. Call me when you're free." Delia called at 9 a.m. I told her about the Germantown lawsuit, not what I'd overheard, but what I knew from her own past reference. I told her I thought it was worth digging into. I told her I thought the community board angle was particularly compelling. Given that Tate's current projects were pending approval from those same boards, I did not tell her about Petra's brand deal. I did not need to. Journalists are very good at following the thread once you hand them the end of it. Delia said she'd look into it. I knew she would. Delia was the kind of journalist who went to bed at night, thinking about open loops. I spent the rest of that morning making a different kind of call. Here's something most people don't know about the Nashville Children's Arts Foundation, of which my mother was a board member. They had recently undergone a governance review after a sister organization in Memphis had a financial scandal. As part of that review, all board members were asked to disclose any potential conflicts of interest, business relationships, family connections to vendors, that kind of thing. The disclosure forms were filed with the foundation's executive director, a meticulous woman named Gail Horn, who had been in nonprofit administration for 27 years and took compliance very seriously. My mother had not disclosed that the foundation's primary printing vendor, the company that produced all their gala materials, annual reports, donor packets, was a firm that had, for the past 4 years, been partially owned by a man named Bryce Kettner. Bryce Kettner was my mother's boyfriend. My mother had a secret boyfriend. Nobody in the family knew. Nobody except me, because I had seen them together by accident at a bistro in Midtown 14 months ago. And I had watched them for 17 minutes through the window before I understood what I was looking at. She was laughing. Not the polished laugh she used at fundraisers that practiced musical sound. She was laughing with her whole body, head back, hand on Bryce Kettner's forearm. And there was something about her face that I had never seen before. She looked young. She looked like a woman who had set down a very heavy bag and forgotten, for a moment, that she was supposed to be carrying it. I had walked away from that bistro and not said a word to anyone. Not to Rowan, not to my closest friend Sadie, not to my therapist. I had filed it in the part of my brain labeled "understand later" and moved on with my life. But now was understanding it. The issue wasn't the relationship. I had no moral objection to my mother having a boyfriend. My father had been dead for 9 years. She was entitled to a life. The issue was the undisclosed vendor relationship, which was, depending on how seriously Gail Horn chose to take it, either a significant governance violation or at minimum a very embarrassing conversation. I didn't call Gail Horn, not yet. I simply drafted a letter, anonymous, on plain paper. No identifying details that outlined the relationship and the vendor connection, with enough specificity that it would be taken seriously and enough distance that it couldn't be traced back to me. I printed it at the FedEx on Gallatin Pike, wearing the gray pullover I use for errands, paying cash. I put it in an envelope addressed to the foundation's office. I put it in my car's glove box, not yet. But soon I had 3 chess pieces in position. I hadn't moved any of them. I was waiting for something, and it came faster than I expected. 2 days after the birthday dinner, Petra texted me. The message was 11 words. "Mom wants us all to do a family lunch Sunday. You in?" No acknowledgement. No apology. No, hey, sorry about the whole leaving your daughter on a sidewalk thing. Just, are you available for Sunday lunch? I stared at that text message for a very long time. Then I typed back, "Absolutely. Can't wait," because I needed to be in the room. I needed to watch them. I needed to understand the full shape of what I was dealing with. And family lunch at my mother's house in Green Hills was the best possible laboratory for that. Callie didn't come. I told her it was a grown-up thing, and she accepted this with the equanimity she'd developed early. The way children of complicated families learn to accept that adult gatherings are a different country with customs they haven't been taught. I kissed her forehead and drove over the hill. The lunch was beautiful because it always was. My mother's house looked like a Pinterest board come to life, the long farmhouse table in the dining room, the sunflowers in the clear glass vase, the late October light coming through the French doors. Renata Voss in a cream cashmere sweater, her silver hair pinned just so, moving through her kitchen with the practiced ease of a woman who'd spent a lifetime perfecting the performance of domestic grace. Petra was already there with Tate and the kids. Foster and Brinley were on their phones. Tate was talking about a new development project. He always had a new development project, and Petra was nodding the way she nodded when she wasn't actually listening. And then Petra said something that changed everything. She said it casually, reaching for the breadbasket like it was nothing. It was not nothing. So I heard from Cynthia at Hale and Sutter. Petra said, "They're pushing the contract signing to January. Apparently they want to do another round of brand review." She made a face, not concerned, mildly irritated. The way she got about delayed things. "I'm sure it's fine." Cynthia said it's just standard due diligence. Tate's jaw tightened slightly. He said, "Which project are they concerned about?" She didn't say reached for the breadbasket and kept my face completely neutral. There it was. The thread was pulling. Delia had made a call or filed a records request or done something that had already sent a ripple back to Tate's world. And he knew it, even if he didn't know from which direction the wind was blowing. After lunch, when Petra and Tate were loading their kids into their AR and my mother was in the kitchen wrapping leftovers, Aunt Greta stopped me in the hallway. She put her hand on my arm. Her face had that careful look she got when she was about to say something she'd been rehearsing. "I want you to know," she said, "that what happened with Callie, that wasn't right. I should have said something in the van. I didn't. And I'm sorry." I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "I know, Petra. I know." I said again. And I smiled because Greta was not part of what I was building. And I didn't want her to be. And I needed her to feel like we were okay so she would stay neutral. "It's handled, Greta. Don't worry about it." She looked relieved. That relief told me something important. She felt guilty, but not implicated. She was a bystander. I could work with that. I drove home with a head full of calculations and a timeline that was beginning beautifully to crystallize. But the thing I hadn't counted on, the thing that would crack the whole story open, was waiting for me in my own kitchen. Rowan was at the table. He had his laptop open and his face had the particular stillness Scott when he'd learned something that didn't fit his existing understanding of the world. He looked up when I walked in and he said, without preamble, "Babe, I need to show you something." I put my keys on the counter. "Okay, take Callaway's company," Rowan said. "The Germantown thing. I know you've been looking into it. Don't give me that face. I know you. I know what you do when you're working on something." So I started looking too. He turned his laptop toward me. "This isn't just a wrongful displacement lawsuit. There's a second filing. Different nonprofit, different buildings, same pattern." And Hadley, he paused. He ran his hand through his hair the way he did when he was genuinely rattled. "Tate's silent partner on both buildings," he said. "Is your mother?" The room went very quiet. "My mother." Renata Voss, 65, cream cashmere sweater, sunflowers in a clear vase. My mother, who had never once mentioned a real estate investment to me. My mother, who was on the board of a children's arts foundation that had undisclosed vendor relationships with her secret boyfriend's company. My mother, who I had just sat across from at a farmhouse table eating good bread, who had looked me right in the eye and said nothing. "How solid is this?" I said, "The LLC docs are public record," Rowan said. "Renata M. Voss. There's no other Renata M. Voss in Nashville." I sat down at the table. I did not feel the chair under me. I felt something else, Not anger, not exactly. Something colder. The sensation of a puzzle you've been working on for years suddenly showing you its actual picture. And the picture being something you didn't expect. This was not just Petra being careless with my daughter. This was not just a family that had one bad night and needed a come-to-Jesus conversation. This was a family that was in the business of protecting itself at the expense of everyone else, including the communities they displaced, including the foundations they exploited, and yes, including a 12-year-old girl in a dress she'd picked out herself. I reached across the table and squeezed Rowan's hand. "Don't do anything with this yet," I said. "Hadley? Not yet," I said. "I need to time this writ." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. He had been with me for 16 years. He knew what I looked like when I had the full picture. That night after Callie was asleep, I went back to my blank document, the correction, and I expanded it. 3 columns, 3 names, 3 timelines, every piece of information, every pressure point, every relationship that was one revelation away from fracturing. I thought about Callie in that bus shelter. I thought about her voice on the phone, small and careful, trying not to cry. I thought about Paulette, the stranger who had stayed with my daughter so she wouldn't be alone. There is a particular kind of rage that is cold and focused and utterly patient. I had found mine, and I had just realized that the most dangerous thing about my family was not what they'd done to my daughter. It was what they were about to do to hundreds of people they'd never even met, unless I stopped them first. The question was not whether I had enough. I had enough. The question was sequence, which domino to push first, and how to make sure they all fell in the right order. I had 5 days before Delia's story was scheduled to run. I had a letter in my glove box, and I had just discovered that my mother was a silent partner in 2 buildings that were the subject of active displacement lawsuits. I closed my laptop. I turned off the kitchen light. I walked upstairs and stood in the doorway of Callie's room and watched her sleep for a while. Her Blue Planet episode was still playing softly on her iPad, the ocean floor one. Bioluminescent creatures drifting through the dark in their own quiet light. I thought, she is so much better than all of them deserve. I thought, watch what I do next, because here's what nobody in my family understood about me. I had always been the quiet one, the professional one. The one who smiled at the table and said, "Let it go, and it's fine, okay?" And she didn't mean it that way. They had spent years reading that as weakness. They had mistaken my patience for passivity. They had confused my silence for acceptance. And now, because they had made my daughter eat a granola bar in a shelter while they toasted with 100-year-old bourbon, now, they were about to learn the difference. But first, there was one more thing I needed to know. One thread I hadn't pulled yet. Bryce Kettner, my mother's secret boyfriend, the man with the printing company. I had filed him away as a pressure point. Useful, but secondary. But after what Rowan had shown me, I needed to know more about him. Because if my mother was a silent partner in Tate's development company, and Tate's development company was currently under scrutiny, and Bryce Kettner was running vendors through my mother's nonprofit connections, then this wasn't just a family drama. This was a network. A small, interconnected, mutually protecting network of people who had been pulling quiet strings in this city for years, and was standing right in the middle of it. I needed 48 more hours. I needed one conversation I hadn't had yet. I needed to understand exactly how deep this went before. I pressed the first button. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, sitting in my darkened kitchen in East Nashville, was that somebody else had already started pulling threads. Somebody inside the family. Somebody who had their own reasons. And they were about to come to me. She called me on a Wednesday morning, 48 hours before Delia's story was scheduled to run. The number was one I recognized but hadn't dialed in over a year. It was Sasha, Aunt Greta's daughter, my cousin, 29 years old and sharp as a tack, and generally the one member of my extended family I actually liked. I picked up on the second ring. "I need to talk to you," Sasha said. "Not on the phone. In person, okay?" I said. "When?" "Today? Can you do lunch?" We met at a Thai place in the Gulch, Sasha's choice, neutral territory, nowhere either of our families frequented. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in the back corner with a water glass she'd clearly been fidgeting with, her dark hair pulled back, wearing the particular expression of someone who had been carrying something heavy and was about to set it down on the table between us. She didn't bother with small talk. She said, "I know what's happening with Tate's company, and I know about Aunt Renata." I kept my face still. "What do you know?" "I know she's an investor. I've known for about 8 months. I found out by accident. I was helping Dad with some financial organizing and came across a wire transfer and some old documents he'd been keeping for her. She asked him to hold some paperwork a few years back. I don't think he knew what he was holding." She paused. I didn't say anything because I didn't know what it meant. But then the Germantown thing started getting attention, and I started putting it together. And Hadley, this is bad. This is really bad. "I know," I said. She looked at me. Something shifted in her face. "You already knew. I found out 4 days ago. What are you going to do?" I told her. Not everything, not the letter in my glove box, not Delia's story, not the full sequence. But enough. I told her that I was not planning to let this quietly disappear. I told her that what had happened to Callie was the last thing I was willing to absorb without response, and that the rest of it, the displacement lawsuits, the undisclosed nonprofit connections, deserved to see the light regardless of what it meant for our family's reputation. Sasha was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "There's something else. Something you don't know." She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She turned it toward me. It was a screenshot. A text exchange between Petra and Tate dated the night of my mother's birthday dinner. I read it slowly. "Petra, she's not going to fit in the van. Just tell her to wait. The driver can go back." Tate, "What if she calls Hadley?" Petra, "Hadley's already on her way. By the time she figures it out, we'll already be seated. She'll come in late and look scattered, and Mom will be annoyed at her, and it'll just be the usual." "It's fine, Tate." "You sure?" "Petra, she's 12. She's not going anywhere. She can wait 20 minutes. I read it twice. I handed the phone back to Sasha. "Where did you get this?" I said, and my voice was very calm. It's the way it got when I was operating from the very center of myself. "Foster," Sasha said. "Petra's son. He's 16, and look, Foster is not happy at home. He and his mom have been at each other for months. He saw the texts on her phone when she left it on the kitchen counter last week. And he screenshotted them because he didn't know what to do with them. He gave them to me because I'm the only adult in this family he thinks might actually do something." I thought about Foster 16, quiet, always seeming to exist slightly outside the smooth Calloway family tableau. I thought about a teenager deciding that a text message was important enough to document and pass along. I thought about what it meant that he'd chosen Sasha and that Sasha had brought it to me. "Is Foster okay?" I said. "He's scared," Sasha said. "But he's okay. He wanted you to know it wasn't an accident." It wasn't an accident. Petra had made a calculation. A deliberate, casual, completely cold-blooded calculation. Callie's comfort and safety were worth less than the aesthetics of a smooth departure. My daughter was an inconvenience to be managed. And my sister had managed her. "Send me the screenshot." I said. Sasha sent it. I looked at it one more time, the timestamp and everything, and then I opened my files and I put it in a folder I had labeled documentation, and I closed the folder. "What are you going to do?" Sasha said again. "I'm going to let some things run their natural course," I said. "And then I'm going to make one phone call. And then it's going to be done." She studied me. "You're not going to blow everything up." "No," I said. "I'm going to let the truth do that. I'm just going to make sure nobody closes the windows first." We finished our lunch. A Tade. I hugged her in the parking lot and told her she'd done the right thing and that I would keep her and her parents and Foster out of it as much as I possibly could. She said, "Hadley." "What they did to Callie, I know," I said. "I've got it." I drove home in the kind of focused quiet that I imagine surgeons must feel before a difficult procedure. Clear, purposeful, everything in its place. The next morning, Delia's story ran. It was on the front page of the Tennessean's business section. digital edition. Published at 6 a.m. The headline read, Callaway Development Faces Second Displacement Lawsuit. City council members call for transparency review. It was thorough. It was fair. It named the buildings, cited the lawsuits, quoted the nonprofit housing advocates, and noted that Callaway Development had declined to comment. It mentioned that 2 city council members had called for a review of the company's pending project approvals. It did not name my mother. It did not mention Settle and Bloom. It didn't have to do any of that yet. It had barely been live for 2 hours when my phone started buzzing. First, next from Petra. Did you see this? This is insane. These people are always going after developers who actually build things. No awareness. No self-reflection. Just immediate defensive rally then. A text from my mother. Hadley, call me when you can. The measured. Controlled text of someone who already knew more than she was saying. Then a call from Tate's number, which I let go to voicemail. He did not leave a message. I made myself a cup of coffee. I watched Callie eat cereal and tell Rowan about a new episode of a marine biology podcast she'd found. She was wearing her blue hoodie, the one with the whale shark on the pocket. She looked like herself, bright, absorbed, unhurt. That was the thing about Callie. She was resilient. But that resilience was not an excuse for the people who had required her to use it. I waited until Callie left for school. Then I mailed the letter. It went out that morning, first-class mail. Addressed to Gail Horn at the Nashville Children's Arts Foundation. It had been sitting in my glove box for 11 days. I had read it 4 times. It was precise and factual and completely untraceable. It described the relationship between Foundation board member Renata Voss and vendor Jason stakeholder Bryce Kettner, with enough documented specificity that Gail Horn would have no choice but to open a formal inquiry. It did not speculate. It did not editorialize. It simply presented facts and noted that the Foundation's governance policies required disclosure of such relationships, and that none appeared to have been made. I dropped it in the blue mailbox on my corner. I walked back inside. I poured more coffee, then I made the one phone call I had been building toward. It was to a woman named Bev Stokes. Bev was a longtime executive at Hale and Sutter, not a brand manager, but their chief compliance officer, a role that most people at the company probably thought of as bureaucratic, but which I knew, from mutual professional connections, was held by a woman who took it extremely seriously. I had met Bev twice at industry events. I had her card. I had thought about this call for a week. I did not tell Bev anything she didn't have the right to know. I told her that I was aware of the pending partnership discussion with Settle and Bloom, that I had some information I thought might be relevant to their due diligence process, and that I would be happy to share documentation if she believed it would be useful. I mentioned Tate Callaway's name and the Tennessean article from that morning. I mentioned the silent partnership connection. Bev was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is this something that's going to be in the press?" I said, "I believe it may develop further." "Yes," she said. "Thank you for the call." Her voice was clipped and professional, and I could hear in it the particular sound of a decision being made. I hung up and sat very still for a moment. 3 moves in one morning. And I still had one left. This last one was not about the lawsuits. It was not about the foundation or the brand deal or any of the professional threads I'd been pulling. This last one was personal, and it was the only one I had gone back and forth about. It's the only one I had almost decided not to do. But then I thought about Petra's text message. I thought about the word scattered. I'll come in late and look scattered, and Mom will be annoyed at her. That was my sister's assessment of me. That was the role I had been assigned in the Voss family production. The scattered one. The late one, the one who could be managed and maneuvered around. I thought about that. And then I thought about Callie in the bus shelter. And I picked up my phone and I called Petra directly. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice carrying that practiced brightness she used with people she was trying to charm. "Hadley, hey, did you see the Tennessean thing? I was going to call you. I need to see you," I said. "In person today, without Tate." A beat of silence. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said. "It's not. But it's going to be. Come to my house at 2. She came. Of course she came because Petra always needed to know what she was dealing with, and showing up was information gathering. She arrived at 2:03 in her white Range Rover, wearing her working nat dash, home dash, butt dash, make dash, it dash fashion outfit, the cashmere joggers, the structured blazer, the things she always wore when she needed to feel like she still had control of the frame. I let her in. I had coffee ready. I sat her at my kitchen table. I put my phone between us, face up, and I opened the screenshot. She looked at it. I watched her face. In my professional life, I have sat across from CEOs who have just learned their company is about to be on the front page for the wrong reasons. I have watched the particular sequence of expressions that a person who has done something indefensible goes through. When they realize they are cornered, first the micro-flinch, then the pivot toward explanation, then the assessment of whether denial is still possible. I watched all of that happen on my sister's face in about 4 seconds. "Where did you get that?" she said. Not a question. A demand, "It doesn't matter," I said. "Hadley, it doesn't matter." I said again, "What matters is that you decided to leave my daughter on a sidewalk. Not because there genuinely wasn't room. You could have rearranged, could have called me. You could have had the driver go back immediately like you told her he would. You chose not to do those things. You chose the bourbon and the vibe and the arrival optics. And my 12-year-old spent 40 minutes alone in the rain and ended up in a shelter." Petra opened her mouth. "I'm not done," I said, quietly. Not angry, past angry. "She sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights while you had a $240 dinner. And then you texted me 2 days later asking if I was free for Sunday lunch. No apology. Not one word. Because that is who you are, Petra. That is who this family has always been. Everyone who is inconvenient just waits. Gets left on the sidewalk and waits for the car to come back." She was very still. I could see her recalibrating, trying to find the version of this conversation she could win. "What do you want?" She said finally. "I want you to understand what you did," I said. "Not to me, to her. She is 12 years old and she idolizes this family and you treated her like a scheduling conflict. I want you to understand that. And," I said, "I want you to know what's coming." I told her then. Not everything, not the letter to the foundation, not Bev Stokes's name. But I told her about Delia and the Tennessean and the fact that the second lawsuit was likely to surface in the next news cycle. I told her that the Hale and Sutter deal was probably dead. I told her that the pending city council approvals for Tate's new projects were likely going to face a much harder road than they'd anticipated. I told her none of this was because of me. All of it was because of choices her husband and my mother had made. And the only reason it was coming to light now rather than later was because I hadn't stood in the way of it. I watched her understand. "You're not going to stop it," she said. "No," I said. "I'm not, Hadley. This is our family. Our family left my daughter at a homeless shelter." I said, "And your husband has been displacing working families from their homes, and our mother has been funding it. So when you say this is our family, I need you to think very carefully about what that means." She left without finishing her coffee. I stood at my window and watched the white Range Rover back out of my driveway and disappear down the street. I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, or not only that. I felt grief. Clean, honest grief for the family I'd thought we were. For the mother I'd believed I had. For the sister I'd spent 40 years making excuses for. The anger had done its work and left room for the sadness underneath it. And I let it sit there for a minute because I think you have to. Then I dried my eyes and called Callie's school to confirm pickup time. Because being a mother doesn't pause for grief. The next 2 weeks unfolded the way I had mapped them. And also in ways I hadn't. The Tennessean ran a follow-up story 5 days after the first one. This one mentioned the second nonprofit's lawsuit, quoted 3 families who had been affected, and noted the connection between Callaway Development and a silent investment partner identified in public. LLC filings as Renata M. Voss of Nashville. My mother's name was in a newspaper for the first time in her life in a context that was not a charity gala or a society column. I know because I heard about it from Sasha, Who texted me? She's at home. She hasn't answered the phone all day. Hale and Sutter sent a formal letter to Settle and Bloom's representative the following Tuesday, terminating the partnership discussion. I heard about this from nobody. I simply checked Petra's Instagram and saw that the Settle and Bloom bio had been quietly removed from her profile. The grid remained. The aesthetics remained. But the brand was gone. The Nashville Children's Arts Foundation's executive director, Gail Horn, reached out to my mother to schedule a meeting. I know this because my mother called me the day she received Gail's email, and for the first time in this entire sequence of events, she did not have her polished silver voice. She sounded tired. She sounded like someone who had set down a performance. She'd been giving for so long that she'd forgotten it was a performance. I think I need to step down from the board, she said. I said, that might be the right call, Mom. A silence. Then did you? I didn't answer. She didn't ask again. What happened next, though? I couldn't have scripted it. I wouldn't have written it this way because it was too quiet, too unglamorous. It's too much like real life. My mother called me 3 days later and asked if she could come over. Not to Green Hills. She wanted to come to my house, my East Nashville house with the porch swing. Rowan had put up 3 summers ago and the overgrown rosemary bush by the front door that I kept meaning to trim. She arrived on a Saturday morning looking like herself but smaller somehow. Less armored. She brought kolaches from the German bakery on Nolensville Pike. It's Callie's favorite. And she sat at my kitchen table and she asked if Callie was home. She was. She came downstairs in her pajamas, surprised to see her grandmother. Renata looked at her granddaughter for a long moment and then she said, Callie, what happened at my birthday was wrong. You were left behind and no one made sure you were safe, and that should never have happened. I'm so sorry. Callie looked at her grandmother with those dark, clear eyes. Then she said, okay, Grandma. Thank you for saying that. Not it's fine. Not no worries. Just, I hear you. And thank you. She was 12 years old and she had more grace than the entire Voss family table combined. My mother ate a kolache and talked to Callie about the Blue Planet podcast for 20 minutes. When Callie went back upstairs, my mother and I sat there in a quiet that was the most honest thing that had existed between us in maybe a decade. Bryce and I are going public, she said finally. The relationship. I've been hiding it because I thought the board, the optics, Mom. I said, you should have been able to be happy out loud. She looked at me. Her eyes were bright. I know, she said. I got very confused about what I was protecting. I reached across and put my hand over hers. It was the most uncomplicated moment I'd had with my mother in years. Maybe ever. It was purchased at tremendous cost, and I knew it was not the end of the hard work between us. There were still the lawsuits. Still the investors who would ask questions. Still the board resignation and the public scrutiny. But it was real. It was the truth of who we could be on the other side of all the protection and performance. Petra was a different story. Petra remained, for several weeks, a fortress. She didn't call. She didn't text. Tate hired a crisis PR firm. I recognized the firm, actually, had competed against them for a client once, and they managed the Callaway development story with professional brisk efficiency. The lawsuits settled. The City Council review found procedural issues with 2 of the pending projects, and those approvals were delayed by 6 months. Which in development terms was serious but not fatal. The families who had been displaced got relocation assistance and back damages. It was not everything the nonprofits had asked for. It was more than they'd had before. Foster Petra's 16-year-old texted me about 3 weeks after everything broke. He said, I heard what happened. I'm glad someone finally said something. Also, I'm applying to marine biology programs for college. Callie says you can do that, I texted back. Callie is correct. You absolutely can. I'm proud of you for what you did. He sent back a thumbs up. Teenagers and their thumbs up. I loved it. 6 weeks after the birthday dinner, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Paulette. The woman from the shelter. She said she'd seen the news. She kept up with city council things because of her work. And she'd come across the Callaway development story and recognized the name from the neighborhood near where she'd found my daughter. She said she just wanted to check in, make sure everything was okay. She said she'd been thinking about the little girl with the good manners. I told her Callie was fine. I told her what Callie's name was. I told her that Callie had, upon learning that Paulette volunteered at the Salvation Army shelter, asked if she could collect books to donate, which she had 3 weekends later, filling 2 canvas tote bags with books from her shelves and insisting on delivering them herself. Paulette laughed. She said, "She sounds like a good one." "She's the best one," I said. "She always has been." We talked for a while about her work and the shelter and the community. And before we hung up, I asked her if the shelter had any ongoing funding gaps. She said they could always use support for their children's programming. I told her I'd be in touch. I did a fundraiser. Not a big flashy one, a small targeted campaign, leveraging my professional network and a couple of connections I had at community foundations. We raised $43,000. The shelter built out a proper children's reading room. They called it, and this was their idea, not mine, the Safe Harbor Room. That room exists because a 12-year-old girl sat in a bus shelter in the rain. That is both an injustice and a miracle, which is how life tends to work when you look at it from the right angle. Petra called me for the first time in late December. It was a Tuesday evening, close to Christmas, and I was wrapping presents at the kitchen table while Callie played something on the piano in the next room. She'd started lessons in September, a new thing, good for her. Petra's name appeared on my phone and I felt the old familiar tightening. The way the body remembers its defensive posture even when the mind has moved on. I answered. She said, "I don't know how to start this." I said, "Start wherever." A long pause. Callie hit a chord change in the next room, found it, held it. "What I did to Callie," Petra said, "was cruel. I don't." Her voice broke slightly. She recovered it. "I've been telling myself it wasn't a big deal, that kids are resilient, that you were overreacting. I've been telling myself that for 2 months. And then I was putting Brinley to bed last week and she said, out of nowhere, 'Mom, what if I got left somewhere?' And she stopped. I waited. 'I can't undo it,' she said. 'I know I can't undo it. I needed you to know that I know what I did.' I thought about the text message. 'I'll come in late and look scattered.' I thought about my daughter in plastic chair. I thought about myself, 11 years old, waiting for Petra after a school play while she was at the mall with her friends. Convinced she'd just forgotten, telling my teacher it was fine. She's just running late, she'll be here. Until my mother finally came because Petra had, in fact, just forgotten. Some patterns are very old. I know you know, I said, and I know you mean it. That's not nothing, Petra, but Callie needs to hear it from you, not from me. From you to her directly. Can you do that? Yes, she said immediately. Yes, whenever she's ready, I'll ask her, I said, and I'll let you know. We talked for a few more minutes, stilted. Careful, the first steps of people learning to walk again on ground that had shifted. It was not a reconciliation. It was a beginning, which is all it could be. Reconciliation requires time and demonstrated change, and we were nowhere near enough of either. But she called, and she meant it, and I was, God help me, willing to see what came next. I asked Callie 2 days later if she wanted to talk to Aunt Petra. I didn't tell her. I'd spoken to Petra. I asked if Callie wanted to. Callie thought about it. She was eating an apple, very focused on it. Then she said, "Yeah, I think so. Not yet. But yeah." I said, "Okay. You tell me when." She said, "Mom, you're kind of a badass." I said, "Language." She said, "Sorry, you're kind of remarkably fierce." I laughed. Actually laughed, the full-body kind. Not the polished fundraiser kind. Here is what I know now that I didn't know the night. I sat at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and an open document titled The Correction. Revenge is only satisfying when it's actually justice. When the thing you're correcting is real, and what you're building in its place is also real. When it's not about winning, but about refusing to let cruelty pass unmarked. refusing to let the story end the way powerful people want it to end. The Voss family is not a ruin. My mother stepped down from the foundation board, disclosed her relationship with Bryce, and is currently working with a nonprofit housing organization in a consulting capacity. Her way, I think, of making something right. Tate's company survived, bruised, and he's operating under a much more watchful eye. The city council members who called for a review are up for re-election, and they know it. Petra's settle and bloom dream is on ice, and she is, from what I can see, doing some version of examining her life. Are these perfect outcomes? No. The families displaced from those Germantown buildings can't go back. The money they lost on relocation costs doesn't fully come back either. The law does what it can and falls short of what it should. And that is a truth I hold without resolution. But the safe harbor room has new bookshelves and beanbag chairs and a mural of the ocean on the wall. Callie chose the design. And my daughter knows, in a way she will carry for the rest of her life, that her mother did not let it pass. That when the people who were supposed to protect her failed, her mother turned around and faced it. That knowledge, that particular inheritance, is worth more than any apology. I could have extracted at a Sunday lunch table on New Year's Eve. Rowan and Callie and I sat on the porch swing and watched the neighborhood fireworks, the illegal kind, the backyard kind, the kind that turned the sky unpredictable and beautiful. Callie had her Blue Planet podcast on, and she was only half watching the fireworks, narrating to herself about bioluminescence, about how some creatures carry their own light in absolute darkness. That's kind of what you do. Rowan said to me quietly. I looked at him. You don't blow things up, he said. You just turn the light on. I thought about that for a while. The porch swing moved. The sky cracked open in color. My daughter, unbothered, luminous, explained to nobody in particular that a certain kind of deep sea jellyfish pulses blue when it senses danger, not to frighten predators, but to attract bigger predators who will come and fight them on its behalf. Nature's so metal, Callie said. So metal? I agreed. I am Hadley Voss. I was the quiet one, the scattered one, the one they left things to clean up and relied on to absorb whatever they needed to put down. I was all of those things. And then my daughter sat alone in the rain, and I decided to be something else entirely, something precise, something patient, something that waited until I had the full picture, and then, without a single raised voice, without a single dramatic scene, I turned the light on. Some of them are still blinking, and my daughter. She is 12 years old and fierce and full of ocean, and she is going to be completely, devastatingly fine. I made sure of it.
If this story moved you, even just a little, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to defend your truth when no one else believed you? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. And if you felt something while listening, if this reminded you of your own journey, or gave you a new way to see family, please give the video a thumbs up. It helps more than you know. Share it with someone who needs to hear that blood isn't the only thing that makes a family. And if you're new here or just passing through, hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories coming, real ones, raw ones, about love, identity, motherhood, healing, and the messy, beautiful ways life surprises us. Thanks for watching, and remember, truth is never something to be ashamed of. Before you click away, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm grateful you spent these moments with me.